Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of TechTalk Dudes. Today, Ronnie and I will talk about a feature within the Defender for endpoint called attack surface reduction. Of course, this is great, and that's something I can tell you all about to protect your identities. But when that's done, when you have implemented all those features, then it's of course good to go into the next layer of protection, which is protecting and minimizing the attack surface on your devices. As usual, I'm here with Ronnie today, and I hope that Ronnie can explain us a little bit more about the attack surface reduction feature, what it does, how it works, and what we can do to improve the security level of your devices. So, Ronnie, is that something which you can help us with?
Sounds like a plan. Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. When it comes to security, Pim, we both know there's no silver bullet. It's a layered approach, and if we're talking about the digital assets we have, part of a zero trust model, we always starting with identity because identity forms the foundation, and from there on, we are able to protect our endpoints, the data, and even applications or our infrastructure. So that's actually setting the scene when protecting our digital assets. And yeah, what you mentioned, our endpoints, there are an important part of how we are able to do our job day to day. And from an endpoint perspective, we were kind of vulnerable. And the endpoint has a kind of a service attack. It's built up from the hardware to the operating system, and from the operating system to the applications, and so on. So it's an entire life cycle. And if we are talking about the endpoint and particularly the operating system, within Windows, by default, we have many security capabilities to protect our endpoints and reduce, indeed, the service attack. So we are becoming less vulnerable to external attackers.
Yeah.
And that can be starting by an antivirus, for example, or even more sophisticated with an EDR solution. To provide that level of protection. But it's also part of the operating system. We have many other tools like Credential Guard, protecting our credentials from credential stealing. But we have also other capabilities like Device Guard with security virtualization. So we are isolating things and loading it in a container way, so if there is a kind of an attack vector, it's isolated.
Yeah.
And one other important part, which is shipped by default in the operating system, it's Exploit Guard. And Exploit Guard is a collection of security controls, including, for example, network protection, but also the attack surface reduction capability. And that's actually what I'd like to highlight today in this session, how you can use attack surface reduction rules, which is part of attack surface reduction, to reduce our service attack, minimize the attack surface, and so we are less vulnerable from malware perspective.
That sounds great. Okay, you got me curious, and I hope the watchers as well. So I'm looking forward to hear more about it.
Yeah. So with attack surface reduction rules, I believe there are 14 now, 15. That will change over time because it's also part of the cloud services provided. We have several categories we can identify from an attack surface reduction rules, and then mostly are related to, for example, protecting our Office, our productivity suite, from creating executables, child processes, or other malicious code which can be dropped through a Word template or by using macros. And that's also one of the things, I would say, from security posture, the basic hygiene, macros can be used quite often, but it comes also with a risk. So that's a balancing act as well. But that's one of the things you can use with ASR, disabling macros, or at least notifying the end user from using. Blocking other executables like malicious payload. Of course, we can use Defender for Office with safe attachments or safe links, or even use Smart Screen to prevent malicious payloads of hitting your device. But if you don't use them, or they might pass those boundaries, then still, and that's reverting back to the layered approach, if you miss that controls the malicious payload, then you have at least another defense in depth, like the attack surface reduction rule. So those will protect you from being executed on your endpoint, or your endpoint got infected. It can be scripting, macros, VBS, whatsoever, malicious payload which has been downloaded, polymorphic threats, for example. So they are really advanced, sophisticated threats, lateral movement, for example, WMI processes, creating by, for example, PSXEC and other WMI comments. So that's actually very broad. And go ahead.
It sounds great, but one of my questions would be, what is what are the requirements to make use of this functionality? Because it all sounds great, but do I need to have Defender for Endpoint P1, P2? Is it by native within Windows Defender built-in? What if the agent is set to passive mode and not to active mode? Is that something you perhaps can shed some light on?
Sure. What I mentioned, the exploit guard and the ASR rules are part of that capability. They're built in within the operating system. So it's by default shipped with Windows 10 or Windows 11. But the management part is done by, for example, SCCM or Endpoint Manager. So you're able to configure these rules. So that's the first thing. And you can enable them by starting in audit mode. So you won't block your applications from running. So it's not disruptive from a productivity perspective. And once you have the insights, then you can go into the next step and put them in block mode or even in warn mode. But later on that. Getting back to your original question, what is the prerequisite? By default, it's shipped with the operating system. In order to manage it, you need a management tooling, and that can be broad, can be various. But ideally, it would be Endpoint Manager or Configuration Manager. Then you enable the feature, the capabilities like attack surface reduction rules, which is great. But then the next step is, how do I gain the insights? And that's where the interesting comes around the corner. Enabling can be done by the management tooling. It's part of the operating system, but gaining the insights by reports, for example, that's a specific feature which is part of Defender for Endpoint that will end up in the Microsoft 365 Defender security portal. Gaining the insights, what shows you the data, because it's part of the event viewer. But how do you gain all those insights? And whether applications are blocked or that's why Defender for Endpoint comes around the corner. And I can show you by showing you the portal, for example, how that will look like, how the insights are presented. And I'm sharing the Defender 365 portal, so it's on the screen. So on the left-hand side, you see the various capabilities organized by email collaboration, and we are now diving into the endpoint because it's part of the endpoint.
Yeah.
So as part of vulnerability management, we have the dashboard, and the cards give you insights about the exposure score, aware threats, but also give you some recommendations. And these are very handy. And today we are talking about attack surface reduction rules, which are part of the security controls you can apply. So here you see a list of attack surface reduction recommendations. So let's take this one. Yeah, this is one of the examples. It's block process creation originating from the PSX and WMI.
Yeah.
What you see here, you see the description of what the ASR rule entails, but also you see the potential risk and what it will be the business impact. Now, in this case, in our environment, which is a lab environment, you see based on the telemetry data, which spans 45 days, it can be safely enabled on 2 devices, which means with those 2 devices, there is no impact expected from a productivity perspective. And we can take another one, for example, what would be the impact? Same 50%. Here you'll see a different one that's 33% safely. But ideally, you want a 100% score to minimize the impact from an end user or productivity perspective.
Yeah.
So this is insights you won't get without a Defender for Endpoint license.
Check. Yeah, and this is the reporting, of course, which you did configure then, I guess, within Endpoint Manager in this example.
Exactly. And you have also here the bridge to Endpoint Manager. Make sure that Defender antivirus is turned on. So the most rules requires that you have Defender for antivirus is enabled, but also active to got applied. And it's also creating a security task guides you where and how to create the security policy from an Endpoint Manager perspective. And you will see also the impacted devices, for example.
Those are really great insights. So just to confirm, with active, you mean you need to use the Defender for Antivirus product as a primary antivirus solution on your device. So the state needs to be active.
Exactly. Yeah. For most of the ASR rules, it must be. It's a prerequisite. Real-time protection needs to be on, and for some of them, you need also cloud delivery protection for some rules which requires that. But also, you can create some exceptions. In case of blocking macros, for example, there might be valid macros used in your organization. So you can create an exception rule based on the pod or the folder which needs to be excluded from the ASR rules. So that's very fine-grained approach. Insights which can be used to implement this successfully.
Mm-hmm.
But from an overall perspective in your organization, we have also another report, and this one gives you a different viewpoint. And this one gives you insights on the ASR rules, which has been configured, whether it's in the audit mode, which would be your starting point, and also actively which are actively blocking processes, for example, as you can see here. And if you drill down, you'll see definitely what documents or macros are involved, which endpoints which are involved, or which processes, which helps you also to identify whether it's legitimate or not, and to add exclusions. And here you see also the device configuration overview, where the ASR rules got applied. And you'll see this one, this is a test device where the rules are applied in block mode. 13 are in block mode, 1 is in audit mode, and 2 rules are off. So that gives you also some insights to implement your ASR rules in a phased approach.
Yeah. So those insights are really great. So what would be an advice for people who maybe have already implemented it or they haven't started yet and want to use this feature more within their environment to basically go from either no setting to audit to block, or what will be what would be the best advice, Ronnie?
Well, my advice would be to use this capability in audit mode, for example. So you don't want to interfere, or you want to be interruptive for your end users or your business. So first, it starts all with insights, and those insights are gained by enabling those ASR rules in audit mode. That's the first step. Yeah. And you can do that in the bundle. So you can create one security configuration policy and add them all to that one, or you can separate it. And then you can target them to a pilot group or whatsoever. And from the other side, it's audit mode, so it's no impacting at all. And from there on, the reports I showed you, you can easily identify which rules you can immediately effectuate, and for those which you might need some extra work in terms of excluding legitimate
processes.
Exactly.
Macros or other things. And what about one of my last questions? What about the one option? Because that's a new one I noticed within the interface. You go previously it was audit and block, if I'm not mistaken, and you got a one option now as well. So what's the difference?
Yeah, the warn mode is actually in addition to the block and audit. So the audit is just from the IT administrator to gain insights. The block mode will effectually hit the end user by starting a process, and then it will be prompted by the toast notification. The warn mode allows you a kind of flexibility. So if you initially start a process, then the end user will get a toast message, and where he or she can say, okay, I want to unblock it. And then the application or process will be available for the next 24 hours. And afterwards, it will be blocked again. So it's a kind of
it's reporting on both ends, if I may say, if I understand you right. It's it's reporting on both ends, if I understand you right. It's first of all going to put an audit record within the security center, and on the other hand, it's reporting to the end user as well. Hey, you're using something which is maybe malicious code.
Exactly, but then gives the freedom to the end user to determine whether it is his or not. And for instance, it can continue. But from the other side, meanwhile, from an IT admin perspective, you can keep track on it and say, okay, this is indeed legitimate, or the end user can report it, it's limited. So that's definitely improving the experience from an end user perspective. And another thing which is worthwhile to mention is that additional ASR rules will be introduced over time. So just keep a look, and I will share a link afterwards, and we'll post it in the recordings.
Comments.
Exactly, to keep an eye on it, because those rules will be added over time. And so you need to revise your configuration to make sure that you are included the latest. And another thing to mention, we're now talking about Windows 10 and 11, but recently with the unified MDA agent, which applies to Windows Server 2012 R2 and 2016, that unified MDA client comes also with ASR support. So it's also giving backward support for a attack surface reduction on Windows Server 2012 and 2016. So that's also worthwhile to mention. So it's not only applicable to the endpoints, Windows endpoints, but also to some server OSs.
Great. Which can be managed again from the same console endpoint manager in this case, or config manager.
Yeah, well, primarily they can be managed by Defender for Endpoint or by Defender for Endpoint attached. Because sometimes servers are not managed through Endpoint Manager because they're simply not Azure AD joined or hybrid Azure AD joined registered. So then definitely the MD attach will be the preferred approach.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good to know. Great insights you provided us. I wasn't aware. Well, I was aware just before the session, of course, but I wasn't aware of the report functionality, which is there for attack surface reduction rules. So really, a great benefit for me, and I hope for all of you who are watching as well. Take a look at it. Make sure that if you haven't configured those rules already, set them at least to audit mode to get the insights, and then take further steps to either warn or block, and to minimize the attack surface reduction of your end user devices. I think that's a very short recap, which of the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, I couldn't do it better. That's the whole essence of the attack surface reduction rules, and that's it. Yeah.
Okay. No, thanks, Ronnie, for your explanation today, and we'll see you again soon.
Definitely. Take care.